I was sitting out here Tuesday night and I was actually editing a video for YouTube. And I left pretty late. It was around midnight or 1 a.m. And I had seen that Val Kilmer died that very night as I was editing, or at least it was announced. I just felt something horrible, as he was an actor that was present in the very early years of me becoming a movie lover. And I credit him to some of the more iconic roles, not only in Hollywood history, but in my personal journey as a movie fan. And I wanted to do one of my more traditional style videos, but this time in honor of Mr. Val Kilmer. What is up, guys? Welcome back to the garage. At the age of 65 years old, we sadly have lost Val Kilmer after a very long battle that he has had with throat cancer. He also had pneumonia at the end of his life, which ultimately kind of expedited his demise. And as I said, I did learn that news on Tuesday. It's been almost a week since he passed away, and I was able to rewatch a few of the films that I've loved so much, really from my high school days. I'm going to give you my top 5 Val Kilmer roles that I personally cannot get enough of as a movie fan. Now, I didn't do this countdown as a top 5 of the movies necessarily, although I do love all these movies. But what I tried to do for this list is I tried to give you not even necessarily the best performance that Kilmer gives, but the best role. And I'll try to elaborate on what I'm trying to say there in terms of deciphering the criteria. He could have been a billionaire doing, frankly, anything that he wanted to do, but he was very specific and very deliberate with his choices as an actor. Real quick before I get into my top 5, let me give you some honorable mentions. There's a documentary that came out in 2021 that really put a spotlight on what Kilmer had been dealing with for several years at the time and what ultimately ended up taking his life a few nights ago. And it was an extreme focus on the struggles that he's had since being diagnosed, but it also did a great job at kind of reflecting on his career. So the documentary Val is going to be included in my honorable mentions, if for no other reason because everybody that's watching this video that clicked on it because you're a fan of Kilmer, or you're perhaps curious about his career and interested in his films, you should absolutely watch the documentary Val, as it will really give you a great insight not only to his acting career, but to the type of man he was, particularly like the father that he was, and in those latter years of his life when he had a lot of struggles in his personal life, but still really strived to take care of not only the people closest to him, but of us, his fans. Here's a clip of him in an interview recently, and he's talking about and getting emotional when he's talking about performing as Mark Twain at a stage show that he was doing in New York City, and how making people laugh through the art of performance and comedy is something truly special.
When you exchange laughter, it feels somehow. I'm going to start to cry. It feels somehow really important.
Yes.
It really does, to be serious about comedy. Because you're sharing something that's beyond words. You can't sort of appreciate it with your mind anymore, and it's real, pure joy.
Other honorable mentions will include the slapstick comedy from the mid-'80s called Top Secret. It's one of those Naked Gun style parody films. But Val Kilmer's performance, and you just saw that clip of him talking about comedy, you can tell how important it was for him to be as silly and over the top as humanly possible, while still seeming somewhat believable, but just making you laugh your ass off. Or how about the movie that arguably gave him his start, at least on the big screen, and that's Real Genius from 1985, one of my favorites from the 80s. A Shane Black film where he's two-handing it with Robert Downey Jr., and it also plays as a great tangential Christmas movie, by the way, Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. Holy hell, what a great performance from Val Kilmer, and just a stellar rewatchable action flick. I mentioned it earlier, but how about 1995's Batman Forever? Easily one of the more iconic roles that Kilmer ever slid into, directed by Joel Schumacher, and he really brought us back to that kind of larger-than-life comic book page-to-screen adaptation with Batman. Now let's get into my top 5. My number 5 favorite Val Kilmer role, and this is actually a great segue to kind of explain to you what I mean and how I differentiate it from like my best movie and best performance. And I'm going to be picking from True Romance, when Val Kilmer portrays Elvis. And yes, I'm talking about Elvis Presley. In the movie and on the cast list, Val Kilmer is credited as mentor, as he's a voice in the head of or in the imagination of Clarence Worley, portrayed by Christian Slater in the film. Christian Slater is a giant Elvis fan, borderline creepy Elvis fan, and he actually sees and talks to this version in his head or in his imagination of Elvis, which is voiced tremendously, by the way, by Val Kilmer. And when I talked earlier about his choices of roles, this is kind of a perfect example of what I'm talking about. You never see Val Kilmer's face in this movie. In fact, there would be no way of you to know that it was him in this role, with the exception of his name in the credits at the end of the movie. And this was in 1993, so Val Kilmer had a prime price tag on his name at that point. He'd already worked with tremendous filmmakers, some of which I'm about to mention, and he had been in giant Hollywood blockbusters where he was the one or two central draw of the film. And then a couple years after this, he would go on to do stuff like Batman Forever. So he was at the height of his popularity, and his agent will probably tell you he could have picked any script in the entire world, but he chose to work with Quentin Tarantino, who was the screenwriter, and Tony Scott, who is a legendary filmmaker that has also gone too soon, who directed True Romance. And he also got to work with some of these young actors that he kind of grew up with on the circuit, kind of rising to stardom. People like Christian Slater and Patricia Arquette. And he played a very, very small, essentially voiceover role where he gave a brilliant Elvis impersonation. If you hear his voiceover in this film, you would think you are listening to dub tapes of actual Elvis Presley from the 1950s or 60s.
Killing's the hard part. Getting away with it, that's easy. You think a cop gives a fuck about a pimp? Listen, every pimp in the world gets shot. 2 in the back of the fucking head. Cops will throw a party, man. As long as you're not at the scene of the crime, smoking gun in your hand, you get away with it. Clarence, I like you. Always have. Always will.
And it's one of my favorite performances from Val Kilmer just because of the ballsy courage it took to take this role, and not only take it, but to nail it and look for no accolades whatsoever, because like I said, you don't even know he's in the movie until you find out after the fact. Some people didn't know for years. My number 4 is going to probably be the most quoted character that Val has ever played in his career, and that's Doc Holliday when he portrayed him in 1993's Tombstone. Now, we got a lot of films right around this early to mid-90s time frame that dealt with Wyatt Earp, Billy the Kid, and those old West kind of outlaw movies, whether you're talking about Wyatt Earp starring Kevin Costner or even Young Guns with Emilio Estevez and many, many others. But Tombstone, for my money, is one of the more authentic, gritty, action-packed, enthralling versions of these Old West stories. And part of the reason that that is able to be accomplished is definitely because of Val Kilmer's portrayal of Doc Holliday. Now, you absolutely have other flawless ones in here, and this is a great ensemble. Actors like Kurt Russell, the late great Bill Paxton, Sam Elliott, so many great, great actors in this film. But somehow, with that A-list giant cast, Val Kilmer stands out in this movie. He is absolutely the one that you walk away from remembering more than any of the others, which is quite a feat based on some of the names I just gave you.
I'm your huckleberry. Why, Johnny Ringo. You look like somebody just walked over your grave.
Fight's not with you, Holiday.
I beg to differ, sir. We started a game we never got to finish. Play for blood, remember?
I was just fooling about.
I wasn't.
But to this day, Tombstone is one of the greatest Westerns ever made, and Val Kilmer is a huge part of that. My number 3 is going to be 1995's Heat from Michael Mann, in which Val Kilmer plays one of our central criminals in the film, Chris. Talk about an electric performance, but done so in kind of a subdued, quiet, monotone way. He is a very ominous, tragic, and somewhat relatable figure among this contraband of characters. Some of the more iconic shootouts in the history of cinema, also some of the more iconic dialogue between characters in the history of cinema. And Val Kilmer is there creeping around in the backdrop of this movie the entire time. And I love his approach to this character and keeping this larger than life situation grounded for us. Even though he's right there on the plane of all these larger than life people, we feel more connected to him because of the way he portrays Chris in this movie. We shouldn't sympathize with him. We shouldn't feel for him, but we do. And Val Kilmer had a brilliant knack for doing that as an actor, where you just connected to him and you wanted him to succeed because of the persona and the vibes that he gave you. And I don't think there's very many that were on the level of his portrayal in Heat. It's also one of my favorite movies of all time, so that helps.
Allow nothing to be in your life that you cannot walk out on in 30 seconds flat if you spot the heat around the corner. Remember that?
For me, the sun rises and sets with her, man.
Yeah.
My number 2, my runner-up, is most likely his most iconic role. And that's, of course, Iceman in Top Gun from 1986, and also Top Gun Maverick, essentially from a couple years ago, as he reprised his role of Iceman in that film as well. But specifically in the first one from 86, which also was directed by Tony Scott, of course, who I just mentioned to you he chose to work with for very little fanfare in True Romance. But what was important about Iceman, especially in the original Top Gun, was how the movie would not have worked if there wasn't somebody there to balance Tom Cruise's kind of suave, easy hero likability in the film. Because Iceman comes along as this very antagonistic, villainous, but also somewhat charming and alluring, just as much as our hero in the film. And they have this rivalry that it frankly is believable. They're essentially two equals, whether you're talking about the level of handsomeness. I mean, let's be honest. Have you seen the scene with their shirts off? And they are just a seesaw battle throughout the movie. Whenever the two of them are in the frame together, it's electric. It's literally like two of the brightest lights that you could ever have shining in your face at the same time, and you're just trying to get to the switch to dim one of them before you go blind. And then by the end of that movie, Iceman comes to terms with the rivalry that he's had with Maverick and realizes that it's larger than the both of them for the mission at hand. And I love that he's the one that kind of extends his hand out to Maverick. And, you know, they talk about being each other's wingman. We see the coming together of two opposites and essentially two enemies for the majority of the film. And then when you fast forward to Top Gun Maverick, Kilmer reprises his role as the elder Iceman and has now gone on to be somewhat more successful, at least among the ranks, than Tom Cruise's Maverick in this series. It's quite ironic, but it also has created a decades-long friendship and camaraderie between the two of them. And like I said, I think because of the success of Iceman and that character, and Val Kilmer having that early in his career, it allowed him to really use it as a springboard, but also use it as a basis to make some really interesting choices in his career. And I love that he was cast for that, and I will never not be praising Tony Scott and the producers, Bruckheimer, because a career was birthed in the public eye, and obviously it's one of my favorite acting careers ever.
You figured it out yet?
What's that?
Who's the best pilot?
No, I think I can figure that one out on my own.
I heard that about you. You like to work alone.
And then I'm going to tell you a story around my number 1, an anecdotal story. I'll try to keep it somewhat brief, but this will explain why Val Kilmer is essentially so special to me. In 1991, when The Doors came out in cinemas, I was in 10th grade. I was a young chap, probably about 16 years old. It was rated R, but I remember in the news that it had almost got an NC-17 rating, which was kind of a new thing at the time. But it was like that middle ground between rated R and rated X. It was like, you can go see it in a regular movie house, but only if you're 17 years or older. Under no circumstances, not even with your parent, could you get in to see it. And my dad was a huge Doors fan from the music. And we had the records in our house, and he had books of poetry that Jim Morrison had published after he passed. And all that shit was around my house for many, many years when I was growing up. So I just knew the Doors very intimately. I loved their music catalog. And I had seen the trailers and the posters, and I was like, holy shit, whoever this actor that they got to play this guy is looks like Jim Morrison. It was almost documentary style footage when I saw clips from it. And I remember when I saw the Doors marketing materials initially, I did not even realize that that was the guy that played Iceman in Top Gun, which was a movie that we had on VHS at the time that I loved. I didn't even put two and two together because he disappeared into this role of Jim Morrison, even on the freaking poster. But I was nervous about the NC-17 rating. Of course, it ended up getting the R rating. And I can remember still not being old enough to go, technically, but I went to my local movie theater and I had a friend of mine who was old enough. Her name was Renee. I doubt she's watching this because I haven't talked to her in decades. She went in first, got ticket because she was old enough. She went in and let me in through the exit, and I came in without a ticket from the exit door, and I was able to watch The Doors on the big screen at the age of 15 or 16 years old. And Oliver Stone became one of my favorite filmmakers right there in that moment. Val Kilmer became one of my favorite actors right there as I was sitting in that theater, and both of them remained in that line for me personally until right now. And it's because of The Doors, and it's because of Val Kilmer's mesmerizing portrayal and his transformative performance, where he literally disappeared into this godlike ancestral character that was floating above all of us and did not even seem like a human. He was just so otherworldly as a musician and as an artist, and was living at 1,000 miles per hour with no care in the world, no concern for record deals or sales numbers, or he was truly, truly an artist, a poet, and that was all he cared about. And the fame and fortune is what kind of fucked him up. And Val Kilmer embodied that so much. Like I remember so vividly that experience in the theater, and I've seen it many times since then. But I can remember just feeling like I was watching archival footage of Jim Morrison. And Kilmer did that, man. He absolutely took me by surprise, yes. And I was like, I think I may have realized as I was watching it, I'm like, holy shit, that's Iceman. And from then on, like I said, I was hooked. I was hooked on this dude. I was one of his biggest fans, and I loved him up until this very moment. As an actor, yes, but as just a figure that I was drawn to in the movies.
In the house of love, I know the dream that you're dreaming of. I know the word that you long to hear.
Now, the shocking thing about all this is even though that portrayal of Jim Morrison was astounding, and the Academy, the Oscars, freaking love a music biopic, maybe more so today than they did in the 90s, but nevertheless, Val Kilmer was never nominated for an Academy Award. Not only that, here's a little known fact for you. He was also never nominated for a Golden Globe Award. To me, that's literally criminal. I don't understand it. I mean, yes, his portrayal of Jim Morrison for sure is probably the number one that you would give him a nomination for. But it's just a sad thing that he went his entire life without being recognized by his peers in that way from those larger awards bodies. And I hate that is a fact that's going to exist forever now. Really, I do. So that's my personal list of my favorite Val Kilmer roles or performances that touch me throughout my life, that I revisit on a constant basis. And I will cherish the films of Val Kilmer forever, regardless of the events that happened this past week, but even more so now, because when we lose these artists that we kind of grew up on, whether it's movies, music, TV, or authors, whatever, it just starts to feel like you're losing a loved one or a friend or a family member. And Val Kilmer is definitely one of those that kind of felt that way for me, because he hit me at the right time with Top Gun, with The Doors, like I just mentioned. Man, that was one of my guys from the get, and I just stayed with him forever. I love his acting, and I love his choices, and he seemed like such a genuine, authentic person that, much like Jim Morrison, really cared more so about the art. Now, Val Kilmer had that extra element of really caring about entertaining the people that he was trying to entertain, make them laugh, make them cry, whatever, and he did that for me in spades. I love Val Kilmer, and I hope he rests in peace, and my thoughts and condolences go to all his friends, family, loved ones it's a tragic loss in the Hollywood community. It really is. Let me know down below what your favorite Val Kilmer role is in the comments. I would love to know. Or is there one that I did not mention tonight that you want to shout out? Please let me know in the comments. And thanks for watching this video. I'll be back soon with more content, and I'll see you guys then out here in the garage.